Well, I don't know how it was with you, but there's one, in all the interviews that I did, there was one question that people want to know, and I was wondering what's your experience with the one question that everybody always asks you. So how much of the main character is you?
People never asked me that because they assumed my characters were so terrible that they couldn't possibly have been rooted in autobiography. And I've only now recently become comfortable enough to admit that they're very autobiographical. It's only been in the last year or so that I've been able to talk about Patrick Bateman as being a very autobiographical character, and that my life at the time that I was working on American Psycho tracked with his in a big way. I was living the same kind of life that Patrick Bateman was, going to the same restaurants and clubs, and trying to live that same kind of lifestyle, and it was making me very unfulfilled, very angry, and out of that frustration came American Psycho. Look, I wasn't killing prostitutes, obviously, and I wasn't, some kind of, crazed madman wandering through Central Park with an axe, but still the rage that I felt fueled that book. And when I look back at every book I've written, I would have to say that it stems from an autobiographical impulse, which is, it's about my pain, and it's about my loneliness, my alienation, my frustration about things. So in that regard, everything is autobiographical. Every book comes from feeling, from emotion. It's not logical, it's not pragmatic. I don't wake up one morning and say, hey, gonna write a book about this, I think. It really is about things that I am going through at any moment in my life. And that's why I write books.
They always say that the first book is always about somebody's upbringing or youth, and first they have to write about their parents or their high school or whatever. In Less Than Zero, was that also autobiographical, or do people always ask that?
Yeah, I guess people always ask that, but all of my work is autobiographical. So when I was writing about the kids in Less Than Zero, which, look, was a book that I began when I was 16, and it took about 4 years to finally get that book to the place that I wanted it to be at. But I look at Rules of Attraction, my second book after Less Than Zero, that's also very autobiographical, and that's about older kids who are in college. Then we move into American Psycho, a man in his mid-20s, and on and on and on. Every book has mirrored at a stage of where I've been in my life. Less Than Zero, yeah, I do get that question a lot, and I used to deflect it. I used to not want to answer it in the way that I should have answered it, which is, yeah, it was autobiographical. It was about how I was feeling at the time. I might not have been as rich as those kids. I might not have been as extreme in my behavior as those kids were. But the alienation in that book and the isolation that pervades that book was something that I was definitely feeling, and something that I definitely wanted to explore at the time that I worked on that book. So again, in that essence, yes, Less Than Zero is a very autobiographical book, though I cannot point to a single scene in Less Than Zero and say, that happened to me. I can't do that with any book. I can say each book feels like it's part of my overall autobiography, but I don't think there's a scene in any book that I have published that I can say, oh yeah, that happened.
After one successful book, almost every day people, or in my case, people ask, so when is the new book coming out? Did that also happen to you, that people very casually would ask that and don't realize that how much of a pressure that would put on somebody?
Well, look, I couldn't feel any pressure because I never looked at writing as a career. I don't look at as writing novels as a career or a job. To me, it's kind of a hobby. It's something I like to do. And I don't ever feel pressure to write a book or to deliver a book to my publisher or to whatever, an audience or a readership. I can't force out a book. I can't will a book to happen. I mean, I have to feel a book in order to write it. Now, I wish I felt a lot more books because I've published very few in my career. Over 25 years, 6 novels is really not a lot compared to a lot of my contemporaries who in half the time have published as many books. So that might be a bit of a problem. Also, I'm a very slow writer, and that also contributes to the fact that there's long lags between the books.
Do you think there is such a thing as writer's block? Does that exist?
I'm sure it does, because I hear about it all the time from people.
Yeah.
People always say they have writer's block. I don't know what that is, because again, if I'm not feeling it, I'm just not feeling it, and I'm not stressing out over it. I mean, if there's a day or a week or even a month that I'm not particularly inspired to work, then I'm just not going to work on the book. I'm not going to freak out about it. But I also have to tell you, that really doesn't happen to me a lot, because I am really sure of the book I want to write by the time I'm working on it. And if I have an idea for a book, I'm excited by that idea for the book, and I'm into that book. And I've also done a fairly extensive outline of that book that I'm following as I'm working on the book. The outline is a very emotional thing. It's a process that takes up about 60% of the overall novel writing process. And that's when the entire book comes out in a very messy first draft kind of, I guess, format. And then the second part of writing the book is when the cool technician comes in and shapes that very emotional, note-filled, kind of crazed first draft.
After the first book, did you have experience with people, like literary groupies coming up to you?
Yes.
And in your case, were they male or female?
They were both.
Okay.
They were both. Yes, there were quite a few of them.
How did you?
I was quite young. I was quite young, and I was quite good looking then. So yes, there were there were quite a few. In retrospect, I should have taken more advantage of it than I actually did.
Yeah. And how did they get in touch with you? How did that happen?
Parties. I was. You know what? I wasn't really like. People seem to think that I was this. I don't know. This figure that hid out in certain places. I was pretty much out on the street and stuff.
Right.
I mean, I had moved to New York, and because all my friends had moved to New York, and I wanted to move to New York, and so we were out and we were at nightclubs, and in public, I was approachable. People could see me at the market or in a park or at the gym or whatever. I was not like hiding out anywhere. And I was very social. So yeah, I did meet a lot of people. I went to a lot of parties. A lot of parties.
And what was the difference between the male and the female groupies? How can they be distinguished?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, in all seriousness, many of the male groupies were wannabe writers.
Okay.
And that wasn't so much the case with the female groupies.
Right.
So that became, and it wasn't always, also, I mean, the groupie, there's a connotation of sex involved in that. It's not always true. I mean, there are groupies who are, very much into you, but that does not necessarily connote a sexual kind of relationship. It often does, but it often does not. And there were often male groupies who were, who wanted to be writers and wanted to be close to someone who had achieved that kind of success at a young age, and obviously had some influence in the publishing industry, and they had their own manuscripts, and so that was part of it. There was part of that going on. It just seems like, I don't know, I talk about this like I'm an old man, and my memoirs of, to be a young writer in New York in 1986. So yeah, I mean, the groupie thing is whatever. I mean, that's probably one of the, I guess, nice things about, getting a little bit of notoriety and a little bit of fame. Makes it a little bit easier to get a date.
Right, yeah. How did other accomplished, famous writers react to you after you first came out?
I guess people were nice to me.
Okay.
I don't know. If I remember correctly, yeah. Having a first novel come out that is successful and well reviewed and is a bestseller, it opens a lot of doors. I met a lot of people that I don't think I would have necessarily have been able to meet otherwise. You'd go to a party, you'd meet people like, I don't know, Norman Mailer or Don DeLillo or heroes of mine. I met Joan Didion, who's a famous North American writer who I ripped off in my early work, and got to hang out with her. I mean, overall, in retrospect, it seemed like it was open arms. You know, people invited me places. But pretty positive.
Okay. And one of the things that I've experienced, and maybe you also, that people would say, this is not real literature.
Those people are retarded.
Yeah.
That's stupid. I mean, that's just such a dumb way to look at books. So I would, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure that was applied to me, but I don't even know what that means. It's something that never affected me. I never felt one way or the other about that. I don't think there are rules for literature. I don't think there are rules for what makes a book good. These rules that these people have about literature, that automatically obliterates Lolita. It obliterates The Great Gatsby. Yeah. It obliterates a lot of fun books that are great literature, that are funny, that, you know, it's just, the idea that great literature needs to be difficult is moronic. So I would never listen to those people, and it's not something that I have ever worried about for one moment in my life.
Okay. Do you feel like part of one group of other writers, or are you just by yourself?
I don't feel like I'm a part of any group of writers, and it's very lonely.
Okay.
It's a very lonely place. It's a little planet that I'm on, and I don't know anybody else in the U.S. who is on my planet. I mean, people like to say Chuck Palahniuk is on my planet. People used to say Douglas Copeland is on my planet. I don't know. I know both those guys. I just don't think so. And I don't see myself grouped in with a lot of people, other American writers. I don't know. I tend to be placed off into some other little world that no other writers are on. And I'm not saying that because I'm so special. I'm just saying people put me there because they don't know where else to put me, whether they like me or whether they don't like me. And I don't feel really kind of any affinity with other American writers, even the writers of my generation. I mean, I love Jonathan Franzen. I love Michael Chabon. I love Jonathan Lethem, all my contemporaries, but I don't feel that I'm writing books like them, and I try to look at other writers of my generation and see if anyone's doing kind of the same thing that I'm doing, and they come up empty-handed. So it's a very lonely place. It's a very lonely place.